Okay, I want to talk about a repair condition in which a flamenco guitar neck is not in the right neck angle position. If it's not too far out, the corrections can be made in the fingerboard by planing the fingerboard. But if the neck is too far forward or too far back for any reason, there's another option that I think is better, or the best option, rather than trying to do something structural like taking the guitar apart and trying to reset the neck that way. I think that adding a wedge of Cuban cedar or Spanish cypress, Spanish cedar under the same material that the neck is made out of, adding a very small, long taper of that material under the neck is better as a solution than trying to do some kind of repair where you take the guitar apart. So now this repair doesn't work in all conditions, but this is an option. Most of the time when you take a fingerboard, or a great many times when you take a fingerboard off of a flamenco guitar, you can push the neck back a little bit and re-glue the fingerboard and gain some angle, pushing the neck back if the neck is too far forward. But if that's not working, here's what you can do. You can take you can make a wedge, or let's call it a taper, because it's going to be about 13 inches long, or 13 to 15 inches long, 16 inches long, and it's going to be about 2 millimeters at the 12th fret, and it's going to be 0 at the nut. So this is a wedge that corrects a neck that's too far forward by elevating the 12th fret and diminishing the angle at the nut. Okay, so what we're basically doing is that we're redrawing the neck angle by putting a 2 millimeter taper, a 2 millimeter thick piece of wood on top of the existing neck, and then replaning the neck angle into that piece of wood, and then putting the fingerboard back on top of it. Now, you also have to take some material off the back of the fingerboard, maybe 1.5 millimeters. I mean, every situation is different. You have to calculate it out with what on the guitar that you're working with. But if you take a little bit of material off the back of the fingerboard, and not changing any shape, if it's an existing fingerboard and you're putting it back on, just take plane a little off the back, and then when you put the fingerboard back on, then this distance, this thickness here from the back of the neck to the top of the fingerboard will not change significantly. So you won't be putting a wedge under here that's going to pad up the thickness of the neck. So the neck will stay the same. You're basically just adding a piece of wood to the neck and then replaning the neck angle into that piece of wood, and then putting the fingerboard back on top of that. Okay, so that's one way to do it. If the opposite problem has happened and the neck is cranked back, but it doesn't want to crank forward, it doesn't want to be manipulated forward through a process of taking the fingerboard off and seeing if you can push the neck forward, then you can do the same thing. You can, and I've done this before, you can put 2 millimeters of neck material on top of the neck and then replane the neck angle into that and replace the fingerboard, taking a little material off the back of the fingerboard in order that you don't make the neck too thick, right? And you can also just make a new fingerboard. So in either of these situations, you can create a new fingerboard, put a taper onto the neck, glue a taper onto the neck and then refine it with your planes and whatever, sanding blocks or sanding sticks. I have one that it's an aluminum square bar, and I can glue different kinds of sandpaper to different sides of it, and it's about, I think it's about a 16 or 17 inches long, and it can be useful for these kinds of things because it's very straight, and you can change the kind of sandpaper on it. So this is one solution, and this can resolve neck angle in some repair conditions, some repair situations. It also, to an extent, it also helps a neck has soft wood that's bending forward. In other words, the neck is bending this way. It's bending forward under string tension. That situation is best addressed by putting carbon fiber spars inside the neck here's the neck, here's the headstock, routing channels into the neck and putting carbon fiber spars, usually about, maybe about this big. There's various sizes. The one that fits inside of a flamenco guitar neck is usually about maybe 10 millimeters tall by 6 millimeters wide, and provides a lot of stiffness for that size. And you can put one or two of them in, whatever that condition calls for to stiffen that neck. You can epoxy them in tightly into the neck, and it will correct neck weakness or whippy necks in most situations. I've done it many times. So these are two things that you can do. The fingerboard taper and the carbon fiber spar, and that will go a long way to fix neck angle problems on flamenco guitars. The first line that you want to try is probably to take the frets out of the fingerboard and plane the fingerboard if you have enough meat left in the fingerboard. The other option is to make a new fingerboard. Now, these are the things that you can do before you go to the other options, which are to take the back off and reset the neck by gluing the back on and resetting the neck by the engagement of the heel, the part of the heel that holds the neck to an angle. Now, that's a really big deal, and I don't like to do that if I can at all help it, because it's very invasive, and ultimately I think in almost all cases it's not necessary if you do these other things. And this idea of the taper with a little bit of wood taken off the back of the fingerboard, if it's done artfully, it's scarcely noticeable, because we're talking about maybe 1.8 millimeters of wood tapering back to 0 at the nut. And if you do it really carefully, and on this side, terminate the end of the taper very carefully. Sometimes the taper will, depending upon how the neck and body joint look, will determine how you finish the taper on the sound hole end. In the case where the fingerboard or the neck is bent back or aiming back, the problem solves itself because the wedge ends up somewhere, between the 12th fret and the 19th fret, somewhere in here. The termination of the wedge is here, and the wedge begins here. And the way you make it look so that it's not wonky is you take some meat off the fingerboard. Now, there's also an advantage of taking a little bit of meat off the fingerboard, is that you might lighten the fingerboard, a few grams, and that won't have a super effect on neck balance, but it can't hurt. So anyway, that's this idea of a taper under the fingerboard.